Hello, everyone. Welcome to our study session. Tonight is Tuesday, January 31st, and we are here to discuss the budget planning for the 23-24 school year. I call this meeting to order. The one and only thing on the agenda tonight is our discussion on the budget, which is going to be led by. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our study session. Tonight is Tuesday, January 31st, and we are here to discuss the budget planning for the 23-24 school year. I call this meeting to Okay. The presentation will be run by Mr. Vaughn and Ms. Reichs.
Madam President, members of the governing board, Superintendent Gunning, and colleagues, thank you for joining me tonight to discuss the district's budget for the 2023-2024 school year. At the January 24th regular board meeting, Jeremy Kayas of True Professional Consulting presented a high-level summary of the district's compensation study and his resulting recommendations. For compensation, these recommendations fall into two categories. For those positions that were competitively compensated according to the compensation study, the recommendation is a 2% raise. For employee groups that fall outside of our peer group median, the recommendation is to bring those positions up to the median to provide competitive compensation. This slide shows projected costs for those recommendations split between maintenance and operation fund and other funding sources. Built into the recommendation of the 2% raise provided by the consultant is a change in what compensation is included when determining an individual's raise. Previously in Litchfield, only the employee's base pay in previous year increase was considered part of base pay and increased each year with compensation adjustments. Instead, this year, the recommendation is that an increase be provided across the historical base pay, M&O override compensation, instructional improvement, classroom site fund base pay components, and graduate credit increases. It's important to note that if Litchfield remained using its historical practice of only providing raises on the historical base compensation, the total cost of the consultant's recommendation would not change because the recommendation would change from a 2% raise on a larger amount to a larger percent raise on a smaller amount. I'll circle back to this point in a couple of slides where I have an example. The classroom site fund is one piece of the teacher compensation that is driven largely by sales tax revenues collected by the state. Based on reports published by the Joint Legislative Budget Committee through December, I project that we'll be able to provide $100 additional compensation for both components of classroom site fund base pay for $200 total from the classroom site fund. At this time, I would not recommend any changes to the performance pay plan or the instructional improvement fund payments. This slide shows how the definition of base pay would play out for an example teacher, given the other potential increases previously discussed. As you can see, the 2% that we're reaching is 2% on that total base compensation, which is the consultant's recommended change of how to do that. And the reason the consultant is recommending that is it's fairly common for other school districts too. And so as Litchfield is providing raises and trying to stay competitive, it's important that we're using similar methodologies to other districts so that in the end, that raise ends up in the same sort of spot, if that makes sense. There were approximately 12 positions as well, where the compensation study showed that the district's salary schedules were outside the median of our peer group. Typically, the consultant recommends the adjustment made to the salary schedule also be provided to the employees in these positions. However, due to salary exceptions that may be in place for those individuals, these recommendations will need to be individually analyzed to determine what raise would need to be provided to bring those employees to where they should have been on the salary schedule, given the consultant's recommended changes. Director Reichs and I will be bringing more detail back to the board on these after the analysis has been completed. However, if all positions were provided the additional raise recommended, it would cost approximately $67,000 as shown on the previous slide. Beyond compensation recommendations, we also have requests for new positions to share tonight. This slide shows our special education recommendations, which are driven by projected student need into next year. We also have new position requests outside of special education in areas where additional need to continue to meet the district's expectations have been identified. On this slide, I'd like to specifically discuss the roving custodians and the transition superintendent position. In the case of the roving custodians, this is the district's attempt to bring this function of facilities back in-house. For the last couple of years, the district has outsourced custodial services at some schools, and we've received feedback from those sites that it may be time to have those services provided by district employees again. As a result, once the district is able to hire these custodians, if we move forward with this recommendation, we could eliminate the contracted custodial. We hope by 2025. I have a slight typo on the slide there. This would be the same, obviously, with the transitional superintendent position. After the transition, the additional position would not be needed. And so on the scenarios, you'll see me go through in future slides, you'll see where I back out the cost of those in 2025. We also have position change requests where instead of a new or additional position, we are proposing changes to existing positions in some way. The total cost of these potential recommendations is just over $24,000. Tonight, I'll be sharing 4 separate scenarios, which are very similar scenarios to what was previously provided the first time we did these multi-year budget forecasts. These have been updated with updated expenditure data for this current year and through January 15th, as well as showing the recommendations we've previously discussed in play. So we'll be looking at 4 separate scenarios. Each of those scenarios show the impact of different potential financial events that may change Litchfield's outlook. The Prop 123 trigger, as a reminder, refers to a component of the Arizona Constitution, which allows the legislature to reduce base funding to Arizona school districts if ADE becomes 49% or more of the state's general fund. The Joint Legislative Budget Committee predicts that ADE will hit that threshold in 2027. Additionally, we'll be looking at scenarios tonight on whether the aggregate expenditure limit is lifted or not this year. While we expect the aggregate expenditure limit will be lifted by a 2/3 majority of the state legislature this year, until a permanent solution is implemented, this will be a concern for districts each year. Scenario 1 shows Litchfield's best case scenario where the aggregate expenditure limit is lifted and Prop 123 cuts are not implemented in 2027. This slide shows how much the district will be overspending recurring resources each year, given the recommendations provided. As an example, by 2027, growth would have the district spending roughly $2 million over recurring revenues. And you can see that as at the bottom right number on the slide. Looking at our next slide, we can analyze our financial reserves ability to support that plan. We can see that this scenario would have the district's reserves fall below the 26% operating reserve lower limit that we've previously discussed. You can see that by the negative $403,000 shown in the last row for 2026. These 2 slides in combination tells me that the district will need to identify $3.2 million of cuts between 2025 and 2026 fiscal years to ensure the district's reserves are protected beyond 2026. The difference between scenario 1 and scenario 2 is the revenue available in 2027. This scenario assumes the legislature will pull back funding in 2027, which they're projected to have the opportunity to do so, as the Arizona Department of Education is projected to reach that 49% of the state's general fund. This scenario shows that even if the district is able to identify $3.2 million of cuts through 2026, as scenario 1 suggests is needed, additional cuts would be needed in 2027 to balance the budget if the legislature decides to exercise their option of pulling back funding in 2027. This slide shows that without the cuts to balance the budget, we would be $4.9 million under our reserve lower limit, further driving home the message of needing to balance it by fiscal year 2026 to not require potentially even more drastic cuts in 2027 if the legislature decides to reduce funding. Sadly, we won't really be able to, we won't know if the legislature will implement those cuts much before the beginning of the 2027 fiscal year. It seems each year the legislature finalizes their budget later and later, which is why it'll be just very important to be going into that 2027 year prepared for whichever way it might go.
Director Vaughn, can I interrupt just for 1 second?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you were going a little too fast.
Sorry.
Back on the, no, that's okay. Back on the slide previous to this, slide 14, you kept referencing a $3.2 million number. I'm
So-
sorry, I wasn't following that. Where am I looking here to get to the $3.2 million number?
We can see it in two different places. I'm rounding up a bit. It's the bottom number on 2026 showing that 3,120,000 that we would be overspending the reoccurring resources in 2026. If we look at the one-time resources slide, you can see that the first year our reserves would go under that lower limit that we've previously discussed is 2026. And so to stop the district from having our reserves dip below that lower limit that we've discussed, you would want to make sure that you were balanced by that year. But I'm rounding up the 3.1.
All right, so it's the 3,120,000. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I was following what you were saying, but you kept saying 3.2 and I was like, that is not what that number says. Okay.
I apologize.
No, I'm with you. I got it. Okay. Please continue. My apologies.
I'd rather say 3.2 and then only have to cut 3.1 than the reverse.
Yes, understood. I agree with that.
Okay, sorry. Scenario 3 and 4 show the impact if the aggregate expenditure limit is not lifted. Again, I believe that it'll be lifted for this year based on language we're hearing from members of the legislature. However, until a permanent fix is in place, it's something to consider each year. For reoccurring revenues, scenario 3 is actually the same as scenario 1 because the aggregate expenditure limit only really has an impact on our reserves. Even with Litchfield's healthy reserves, if the AEL is not lifted, our reserves would be an estimated 7 million below our lower limit for reserves at the end of this year. And you can see that as the last number in the column for 2023. To mitigate this as a one-time solution, the district would likely cut into our capital reserves and to remain operating reserves at the minimum. It would have a significant impact on the ability of the districts across the state to operate and be financially secure. So having the AEL addressed is incredibly important. In these scenarios, even with shifting some of the burden to capital reserves, the timeline for cutting the budget would likely need to be accelerated to 2025 to protect the district's reserves as opposed to spreading them across 2025 and 2026 fiscal years. And the reason I say that is just because of how much we would be below that minimum reserve level if we did not do that. Similar to scenario 3 being the same as scenario 1 for recurring resources, scenario 4 is the same as scenario 2. It's just that the one-time resources shows the impact of having the AEL not lifted and resources being reduced in 2027. So it's much the same story of just the importance of having the AEL lifted, connected to districts' abilities to be financially secure. As a reminder, these scenarios all assume that student growth will occur as forecasted by applied economics. Class sizes remain the same. All increased costs for employee benefits is passed on or eliminated through plan changes. Compensation increases are implemented as recommended on previous slide based on the compensation study, and 2% raises are continued into the future. ESSER costs are continued in M&O in 2025, and the temporary positions added last year are continued. These assumptions will be discussed tonight with some options on changing them, while others we will potentially cover in future study sessions and board discussions. As a reminder, these are the ESSER costs assumed continued in M&O after the grant ends in September of 2024. The district also added grade level aides last year and contract substitute teachers. We will discuss these items further in future study sessions. We currently have surveys out to gather feedback on these positions. This slide simply summarizes what we've already discussed. The district can afford to continue on its current path for a couple of years, but cuts will need to be made in future years to bring the budget in line with recurring revenues and protect the district's reserves. Next, we'll discuss some potential increases or additions to the budget in some detail, as such as the cost of additional compensation increases and benefits. Before we move on to those areas, I would just like to caution that any additional costs beyond what's been built into the base assumptions will increase the amount the district will need to cut in future years. Before we move on, are there any questions on what we've covered so far?
Danielle, or sorry, Ms. Clymer, do you have any questions?
Are we doing this in two parts? So we should go through and ask all the questions now
So-
for what you've done up to this point, and then we'll ask Director Reich's questions.
What we thought might help guide the discussion, just so we're not jumping all over the place, is that we stop at various points,
Yep.
review and ask questions. For example, in a future slide, I have the cost of additional compensation increases, and I have a pause after we do that slide as well. So I would say that there's not much need right now to jump ahead in the slides, but if you truly do have a question on what we've covered thus far, it seemed like a decent spot to stop. And
Yeah, no, I'm good. I will go through my questions. I will see if I can number the slides so that you'll be able to look and see. Going back all the way to slide number 4. In the summary of compensation study recommendations, it lists 2% raise recommendation for positions that were already at or above the median. I understand that. Recommended changes to bring the other positions to the median of the peer group would be considered their increase at that time. Has there been taken any in consideration if there are positions that, let's say there is a less than 2% increase to get them to the median? Are you going to give them the full 2%, even if it is a further adjustment than just the amount to the median? Does that make sense?
so the way the compensation study was done, if the position was under the median peer group, the raise recommended was what was required to get it to the median, or the 2%, whichever was greater.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. That answers the question. Thank you. On the next slide, and I'm sure we'll have more conversations about this and others may have questions about this. This initially came up in the presentation last time about condensing our base pay into all of these items. I'm on slide 5. And your comment when presenting was if these are not included in the base, basically we're going to ask for, let's say, a 4% raise. So we're going to adjust. So what is the benefit of doing it this way? If as a teacher, I'm going to get the same amount of money either way, what's the benefit of condensing?
Honestly, it's just semantics, quite frankly. The reason Litchfield separates it out this way is on a teacher's pay stub, they can see, for example, the impact of the M&O override to them. And so I don't mind the recommendation that when we talk about raises, we talk about it in terms of the total base compensation as recommended by the consultant. I'm more hesitant to actually change how it's shown on someone's pay stub, if that makes sense.
I'm in agreement with that. I think what we say on a compensation document in terms of here is what you're getting paid at Litchfield, I don't have any disagreement necessarily in combining these, because I know we've talked a long time and Jody sort of spearheaded the effort of like, how do we make this just easier, right? I mean,
Right.
You look at all these different pots and buckets and all of this, and we've talked about it over the years, it's just difficult. So I'm not opposed to that. Although I do think that we need to talk about how we handle the M&O. I think of all of those things, the M&O, the M&O override is different to me. And I'm hesitant to give a base pay raise on an override that is not a dedicated funding source. And so that gives me pause. So I'm not in full agreement of that yet, but I could probably get somewhere near there. But I am in agreement that I like the idea of it being separated out, because that is, to me, more transparent to our employees, so that when we say, if this override doesn't pass, that's $2,500 off your paycheck, they're literally seeing that on a monthly basis and what that really means. And we don't have to calculate it for them. So if it really is just semantics, when it boils down to the very bottom, I think if we can condense it in the areas that make it simpler, we can certainly do that. But I like the idea of still having it pulled out, even just so that for the explanation purpose of being able to show that. So
I will say, if I can add to my answer,
Yeah.
For the sake of compensation increases, it's effectively semantics. Where it does have an impact is placing people on schedules and salary exceptions. So right now, those are calculated based on giving a certain percentage, 1%, as Jeremy shared in the compensation study presentation, 1% per year of experience. If you recall, he shared that we fall behind on honoring that experience. The reason Litchfield falls behind is not because other districts are giving a 2% or a 3%. It's because they're applying the 1% to all of these, whereas Litchfield is applying the 1% to just the base pay. And so for the sake of compensation increases, it doesn't really make a difference. For the sake of salary exceptions, it would be a difference, because it would increase what that compensation for experience adjustment would be. Does that make sense?
no, it does make sense. I think we've talked also, and I don't think that we are doing that and certainly having this conversation right now, but we've also talked about there are many adjustments that need to be made to that sort of pay chart anyway.
Yes.
That, probably starting over and doing something a little different would probably behoove us in the future anyway. So understood what you said, know that there's some differences there that we probably need to be mindful of. On slide 7, where you talk about the performance pay, the improvement pay and all of that, just for Mr. Owen's sake, and for those people, just to be fully transparent, I know you're not recommending any changes, but just having that laid out so that we can see all of it together would be helpful. I mean, we know what it is because it was approved last year and no different, but
Yeah,
just for transparency's sake, so that everybody's on the same page.
I certainly can bring that in the future. It changes based on position.
Right.
Which is why I didn't try to summarize it in just a slide. But as an example, if we go to our example teacher raise, if I recall correctly, this teacher was at the high level of the performance pay. And so just as an example, if you're at the highest level of the teacher performance pay for M&O, it's $4,400 a year.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. On slide 10 for the special education position request, this is a significant amount of money and positions. We know they're needed every year. I think we approve more and more special ed positions. What is the funding source here as our special ed population grows, but it seems our funding does not? So how does that work? And I mean, I know we have grants and we have all kinds of different things, especially with the special ed group. But when we're looking at $640,000, that's all just coming directly out of M&O, or there's other funding sources that are providing for this?
So the district does have several funding sources for special education. As you mentioned, there's the federal IDEA grant. Over the last number of years, that's actually been staying fairly stable for the district. So not really an increase in resources available there. The district does technically receive additional funding for special education students. They're weighted heavier, which is why if I can just go to one of the scenarios real quick so I can point to a number. So that top number of the weighted student count, I'm not saying that this year we have 13,800 students.
Sure,
But
understood.
after the special ed weights are added and all the other weights, that's the number that they apply the base support level to. So special ed students do generate additional revenues for M&O. However, there's recently been cost studies for special education that show that does not cover the full cost of actually providing the needed services to those special education students. So it really is a large concern statewide, especially as the percentage of students within the state skews more and more towards special education.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting just for us as a board and as a district to be really transparent to say, based on the weighted counts, we have X number of students, they generate X number of dollars, and we're paying out Y.
Sure.
Because we're not getting $640,000 of funding. And so that is, we're doing that in lieu of something else. And so I think it's important to make people aware that it is not by accident that people seek out Litchfield Elementary School District for our special needs programs.
Yes.
And this is why. So I think just in full transparency, be able to see what the funding actually brings in and what we actually need based on our student population. So I know that's additional calculation, but it would be helpful to see that.
I don't mind doing it. And there's other areas where that's potentially possible too. The district receives M&O funding, for example, for transportation. And so if we wanted to show that, we could show what the transportation function brings in versus what we spend on it.
Actually pay out. Okay. I think I just had one more question. So thank you very much for giving me the time. I think just the next slide, we talk about I think that'd be slide 11. In the facilities, the roving custodian, I remember a couple of years ago, Director Ensign presented that we were just having a hard time finding people to work. I believe it was either the start or kind of as we moved into the COVID pandemic, and we were struggling to keep up with the needs of the school, especially in the area of custodial services. So do we feel like we are through the woods, so to speak, that we're actually going to be able to find employees to do this work? And is the reason that the school sites are requesting it is because the services that are being provided are less than our desired quality, is what I'm assuming. And so if we hire our own, we would obviously train and provide guidance on what those should be, which makes perfect sense. But I noticed you say, you know, we would phase this out over time. Is that to alleviate the challenges that we're going to have finding people that would do this work?
Right. So we really do feel, and perhaps I'll hand the mic over to Director Reichs to talk about it more from a HR perspective, but we really do feel that there's been a change in the labor market, whereas there were some positions in the facilities area where for the longest time we couldn't find candidates, and we have been able to in recent months. So we actually believe that if we ever want to move away from contracted custodial, that this might be our opportunity. But you're exactly right that we hope to raise the level of service to our schools by bringing it back in-house.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for the time. I'm done for now.
Ms. Moran?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. On slide 8, we talk about positions recommended for additional increase based on the salary schedule study. And it says that admin are reviewing those, the compensation. Are our current IT openings included in this piece that you guys are looking into? I know we've struggled with filling some of our IT positions. When I look at the salaries, they look low compared with other employers. We've had people leave and go to other districts because they can get paid more elsewhere. So is that part of this, or would that be a separate?
So the the level of detail at which the compensation study did the analysis is basically at job title. So there certainly is at least one IT position in that group, but I would not say that it's the entire department or even a majority of the positions.
Okay, can we incorporate in this any, I guess what I would say, hard to fill positions, meaning positions that have been open for 6 months or longer? Is that possible?
It would actually not be very difficult at all, because one of the numbers I calculate to estimate our expenses to the end of the year, if you recall, I assumed that if a position was vacant, it was going to remain vacant for at least a month. And if it had been vacant for at least 2, I was assuming it was going to stay vacant. So I already have effectively a list of positions that have been vacant for some time. So long-winded answer, no, I don't think that would be very difficult to identify those. Where it may be difficult is the compensation study reviewed placement charts of other districts. And if the consultant didn't already identify those positions as needing an increase larger than the 2%, it's because based on the data that they saw at those peer districts, it didn't need it. And so I wouldn't necessarily have the data to compare against, if that makes sense. If we wanted to look at industry, that's an entirely different discussion. In certain positions, the consultant definitely tried to bring in industry numbers. But as we all know, there's just certain positions that a school district would always struggle to compete with private industry on. And I think sadly, IT might be one of those areas, just being fully transparent.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I just want us to not be 100% scripted to the compensation study. And I want us to look at the struggles that we are having in filling our positions and take that into consideration when we talk about the budget for next year as well. My next question touches on what Board Member Clymer brought up, which is the special education additional expenses. Can I just get some background as to, the explanation here or justification is new program due to student need? Does that mean more students? Does that mean students with different needs than what we have now? Tell me more about where these changes are coming from.
I'm going to hand that off to Megan to provide a better answer than I would ever be able to.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Moran. Yes, that question, you just nailed it. Our sizes have just blown up recently. The number of children qualifying for our specialized programs have increased significantly. Currently, we have 10 preschool programs and 32 school age programs, but the school age programs that we have noted in these position requests are at their maximum. And as our psychologists and teams continue to evaluate, our prediction is that we could start out the year halfway filling the positions that we've requested on this list.
Okay, thank you. I will just reiterate Board Member Clymer's request, which is I, of course, am super curious to find out, what the numbers look like when it comes to special ed. We know we have unfunded mandates, and I'd like to be able to fill that gap in with what that actually looks like. My last question on this section is about the roving custodians. Is that something that we can phase out of? I wasn't exactly clear on that. So, we have these contracted custodians now. As we hire new people in, can we phase that out? Or is that kind of an all or nothing based on our agreement with the company?
We have reviewed that contract because we had the same idea, and sadly, the way the contract is written, it's effectively an all or nothing.
Okay, interesting. So do we have like a tipping point that we've determined we'd like to get to? I guess I was hoping that this would just be like a phase out and the 833 would balance out with the 838, but it sounds like that is actually going to be a duplication up to a point.
I definitely don't think it's going to take us all of next year to hire the positions, but just for the sake of the scenarios, that's what I put in. I believe Director Ensign shared that he believes if we were able to fill 12 of the positions recommended, we would be able to at least provide the services that are currently being provided from the contractor. So we would not need to fill, if I can get back to that slide, we would not need to fill the total number, the total 19 before being able to phase out the contracted services.
And what's our lead time on canceling the contract? 30 days, 60 days, 6 months?
I believe it was 30 to 60 days, but I'd
Okay.
have to double check that. It was
Okay.
30. Okay.
Okay, great. That's all my questions right now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mr. Owens,
No questions for me.
Mr. Honak, did you have any questions?
A couple, at the beginning, there was the numbers is not my main reason for being on the school board. So I don't really, I'm more interested in academics, but, the beginning, there were various strategies based on, presumably does any of this have to do with the legislature is now considering, or there are people in there that are talking about not voting for the raising, I guess, the aggregate expenditure limit based on, schools' failures of academics and things like that. Are these connected at all that we're considering these strategies right now? Or is that just something that's non-related, that's another incident, event that may or may not happen?
Scenarios 3 and 4 in the presentation look at the impact of the aggregate expenditure limit not being lifted.
Okay, and so is this something that is done I know you've only been here for a year or so. Is that something that is normally considered, or are we doing these scenarios? Are we considering these scenarios because of a potential action by the legislature of not lifting the AEL?
This is the first year I've been here, but my understanding is that historically we have not looked at various scenarios, but that was a recommendation and request by the board. The reason I identified these specific scenarios is exactly what you're stating, is that the aggregate expenditure limit being an issue is actually a rather new concern for school districts. And that was caused by a myriad of changes to how school districts were funded over the last couple of years. So historically, the aggregate expenditure limit has not been as much of a concern because school districts were not in a position that they would be going over it every single year.
Okay,
So,
that clarifies it for me.
okay, thank you.
And then one other question I have, and I'm not, maybe it's for Ms. Duplain or something, but why is there seems to be a very significant increase in special education students? Is there something causal that would identify why that is?
Yes, sorry, Board Member Honak, my battery died on my microphone. We have been noticing an increase in children with special needs in our district every year. In fact, in 2017, we were approximately 10% of our student population were children with special needs, and now we're at 14%. When we look at the state average, we are right in alignment with that. The state is finding the same exact thing. We are looking at children with more needs, and we're able to identify them, and they qualify under IDEA to receive an individualized education plan. But that number is definitely on the rise, and we're seeing it significantly in our preschool programs the last couple of years, which then they turn into our school age programs, and that number is alarmingly high.
So I'm not trying to be facetious at all. But is this, but the way I word it may sound that way, but it's not my intention. But is this because there is, that there is, parents are more attentive to the possibility that if they request something, that the climate is such that the school is more likely to grant it? I'm not making it very clear, that maybe like more testing is going on for things that that previously parents maybe recognize that, every child is a little different, but that they just assumed that it was, just a normal variance in personality, whereas now it's sort of turning into institutional something that needs to be addressed, that's just not part of the normal spectrum. So is it because there's more of a focus on it, I guess, that people are paying attention to it and it's being, or is it something else? Are space aliens putting something in the water, or, is it, and again, I'm not trying to be facetious, but is there something else that that we're not recognizing? And I'm
Sure.
not,
Let me try and answer that, and then you tell me if I'm on the right track. In order to find out if there's more parents requesting an evaluation, we would have to pull that number. But what I do know is that when we evaluate a child for special needs, our psychologists have a set criteria that a child must meet prior to recommending that they become eligible for special ed services. So I think I know that the number of children who qualify for special ed is increasing, but our criteria has stayed the same, and it's according to IDEA. We haven't lowered that criteria. So your first point about additional parents or additional requests from parents, we'd have to pull that number, but because I do not have that in front of me right now. Board Member Honak, did that address your concerns or questions, or do you have follow-up?
it did very well address it in it, but I just had, at this point, I just sort of my comment, maybe you could say it's valid or not, would be that that could be because there is a change in the population, but it also could be that more parents are making the requests. And so where previously, had they not made the request, their child would go undiagnosed. But since they are making the request, a higher, even if the student population's the same, it would drive up the numbers of those qualified simply because more children were being tested at the request of the parents. Does that seem like
That, yes, that definitely could play a role in this as well.
Thank you. I go completely have all my questions answered. Thank you so much. You did a great job. Thank you.
Ms. Clymer, you said you had another question.
Yeah, as we were talking about the AEL with Board Member Honek's question, it reminded me at least of just a question. And again, I don't think we need to go into this at great detail because I think we're all hoping that this isn't going to be a problem that we need to address this year. But in your scenario 3, which I think is slide 18 on my presentation, you have the AEL being absorbed 100% from our reserves. That seems highly unlikely to me that we would just say as a blanket statement, we're going to swallow $14.6 million. I think we'd have to make some pretty hefty cuts other places to do this. So I just want to just making the suggestion, this is worst case scenario in terms of we're just swallowing the whole thing and work it out later. When in reality, we probably would have some flexibility in cutting. I say flexibility in the loosest terms there, to be able to cut additional programs to limit that financial risk on our reserve account.
We would, so yes, this is worst case. The reason I presented it this way was a couple of reasons. One, it provides some insight on how much we may or may not want to shift burden to the capital reserves. The second reason is the point at which we will know if we have to make those cuts or not are very late in the year. And so our options on making cuts would be very limited. We certainly could get creative and find some, but it would need to be absorbed by the reserves to a certain extent, which is why in other districts that don't have as healthy of reserves, you hear conversations of potentially them needing to close down.
Yeah. Okay, understood. Thank you. One last question, this actually, I believe, is probably best directed at Superintendent Gunning. On the last slide here, the summary of key assumptions. It's listed, the ESSER costs are continued in M&O starting in 2025. So we're just absorbing all of those costs we're currently paying today into fiscal year 2025. I guess the bigger question is, do we want to keep everything? And at what point, and what is the timeline in doing an evaluation to say, hey, we definitely want to keep this, but we don't necessarily need to keep this. What is the timeline we have to make those decisions, even though it doesn't affect us this fiscal year?
Thank you, Board Member Clymer. That's a great question. We assumed that we were going to absorb all of them because we're still in the process of determining return on investment as we collect data throughout this time. This will be important information where I think we will have recommendations as a leadership team for you next year, right? Because it drops in September of 2024. So those changes or cuts that would need to be made would need to be decided in the budget season next time. So that's where we would bring, I envision it as scenarios again in regards to ESSER. Of here's the things that we felt gave the greatest return on investment that we would like to keep. Here are some nice to haves kind of thing, but they're lower on that level. So kind of just giving various scenarios to where the board could look at the budget impact and then look at return on investment to see where they would place the value in those items.
Okay, so we'll use the next year as a consideration phase, basically, of evaluation, and the next budget cycle in the spring, we'll make those determinations. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No
Does
additional
anyone else have
questions.
any other questions? No questions? Okay. We're ready to move on.
All right, so to help everyone follow along, I believe we're now moving to slide 25. This slide shows the cost of an additional 1% base increase to M&O using the same base pay assumptions as recommended by the compensation study. If I could, I'd like to hear from the board if each member has a compensation increase range that they may presently be comfortable with. That would help us moving forward with further budget planning. However, before we start that discussion, I'd like to remind everyone the methodology used in the salary study. The salary study consultant reviewed Litchfield and a number of comparable districts and provided recommended raises this year to ensure Litchfield would have competitive compensation for all positions in 2024, according to his analysis. As a result, the 2% base compensation recommendation is designed to keep Litchfield competitive into the future. It's important to remember as we look at potential raises coming from other districts that Litchfield is already in a strong position, whereas other districts may not be, meaning they need to give larger raises to catch up, and Litchfield does not need to provide as large of raises to remain competitive. I'll now open it up for discussion on that point.
Ms. Clymer.
So you're just asking us based on this chart with starting with a base of 2, what is the range above 2 that we would like to see? Is that the question?
Yeah, based on the scenarios, all the data that we're sharing tonight, are we comfortable with 2, or would we like to see scenarios with additional? Again, I'd just like to remind that any additional we spend here will just increase the amount we need to find to cut in future years. So
Yeah, I will say I'm not 100% prepared to say, yes, it's going to be 3.5%. I don't have that number in my mind, but maybe after this conversation, I'll have a better idea. However, I will say, I think it's important, again, to be super transparent about what 2% means in relationship to what is base pay. Because I think if I'm a teacher and last year I got 4%, and the year before that I got 5%, and the year before that, I mean, there have been some pretty hefty raises because the base was different. And so I think without knowing what that equates to, is hard for me to say, you know, I look at this and I worry about an additional increase on top of what I'll call the 2% base increase, because to your point, this is just that much more. We have to cut somewhere else. And to me, what that means is positions, programs, initiatives. And I worry about jeopardizing the success, the academic success we've seen just in the short time, whether it's been summer school, tutoring, the new math specialist positions, you know, we could go on and on. I'm concerned about jeopardizing those by continuing to add to this. So I'm not prepared to say any more than the 2% right now. If by some means we're able to do that, yes, but I do think we need to have a side-by-side comparison of what 2% means with this new base and determine if as a board, we're in agreement that that's what the new base even is. And that's what we're going to calculate moving forward, so that that 2% number doesn't scare staff when it's really it's equivalent to a 4% from the years past or whatever that might be, if that makes sense.
Ms. Moran.
I agree with Board Member Clymer. I think a great way to illustrate that would be to use perhaps the same example that you have here and look at from, the 21 to 22 school year, 22 to 23, what did that really look like? Because I agree, when we talk in percentages, I think teachers have a number in their mind that they're expecting as a percentage, not as a dollar amount. So I think it's important to translate those two things together. I agree with Board Member Clymer in that right now, the 2% is the recommendation that has been made to us. Of course, I want to give our teachers as much as we possibly can, but we also know attached to this conversation is going to be a benefits conversation and other things. And the way that we receive funding is a limited amount. And so if it's coming out of one thing, it's going into another, we can't do both of those. So I would like to see a scenario with an additional 1%. So 2 plus the 1, knowing that that's probably not going to be feasible, but would I like to look at that? Yeah, I'd like to see it. And then we can get back together as a board and decide if that's going to be reasonable or not. Obviously, we don't want to give increases today to have to cut programming later. So I know that's the difficult piece that we're in right now as well. So it's a balancing act, but yeah, I would like to see an additional 1%. And again, if we can look at that in dollar amounts versus percentages to get some comparison between historical raises and what that might look like for a teacher or a staff member today would be great. Thanks.
Mr. Owens.
Yeah, I'm just going to agree with what's been said. Again, I'd like to give as big of a raise as possible, but we have to be, financially responsible. And right now 2% works with our budget and those other additional factors that we have to consider. So, but like Board Member Moran said, 2% on a raise this year, when you break that down in dollars, it could be a bigger raise than you got last year, maybe at 3% or something like that. So comparing the years will be helpful, but I don't think I'm in a position to say anything more than 2% right now.
Mr. Honak.
I don't have any questions on this. Well, I mean, I feel like we've already gone through, maybe that was when we did the raises and experience and stuff like that, but I don't really have any questions because I don't think this is the big issue.
Okay, I would like to see the 3% as well. I do have a question though. For me, 2% is easy to say, okay, because right now the legislature is talking about just passing the same budget basically from last year plus the 2% they have to give us. So that means we're going to get 2% more, teachers and get 2% more. However, if somehow they pass a budget that gives us more money, can we come back and talk later at possibly doing a higher percentage at that point?
Potentially at that time, I would probably also talk about the benefits of using that money to reduce the cuts that we're looking at having to make. So for example, in previous slides, I was talking about needing to find $3.2 million of cuts in future years. If revenues long term were to increase, say $1 million, from what the scenarios currently show, we could also make the decision that, okay, now we only need to find $2.1 million of things to cut. Because of the financial position we're in and the potential financial cliffs of ESSER and the other items that we're showing in the scenarios, I don't know that we would want to kind of rush into the decision that any additional funding would go to base increases, because we may also decide that it's most financially prudent to use that to help balance the budget sooner. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Well, I have a question to that. I mean, not just to you specifically, but to that comment of if we know that we have to find $3.2 million by fiscal year 2026, right? That's the right timing. is it possible for us to decide that right now we're not going to spend 100% of our budget so that we can save some of that and save over time? Because a $3 million hit in one fiscal year is massive. A $500,000 hit this year and this next year and that to me, that feels more palatable. And it doesn't feel like when we get to 2025, 2026, we're literally going to jump off a cliff. So I hesitate to say, like, let's just pay everybody all of this money, which I would give them all the money we had, but just to take it back, that doesn't make sense to me.
Agreed. One of the benefits of looking at these multi-year forecasts is to allow us to have these long-term discussions. My hope would be, in Michael's perfect world, we would probably identify half of the cut for the 2025 budget and half of the cut for the 2026 budget, so that it isn't a $3.2 million cut, all in the same point. But to your point of setting aside resources, we certainly could. So we could reduce the recommendations, if you will, and the impact that would have is on these one-time resources slides. That's why I break out one-time resources versus recurring resources. It would increase our reserves. But I don't know that we'd be able to do so significantly enough to really push it out too far. I think my recommendation as our best bet would be to split the cut kind of in half and address half of it next year and half of it the year after. In doing that planning, making sure that the two plans work together and that it's just a phased approach. But
I guess what I'd like to add to that thought process is we have to keep in mind that one of the reasons that we're going to face this cliff, if you will, is because of the ESSER funds. And we were given the ESSER funds to help make up from the impacts of the pandemic, which we're still in the middle of facing that increase and making up for the academic loss that occurred. So, there would be a thought that would say, well, why don't we just start cutting our budget today so we can save up money to address that cliff? But we're still in the middle of what we got that funding for in order to impact that. So we could get to the place where next year or the year after, we see that we don't need to do as extensive summer school, or we don't need to do some of these programs. And that's part of the ROI process that the administration's looking at to give us some answers to those things. So I'm hopeful there's a combination of those things. All of the things that we've put in place have been amazing, and they're definitely positively impacting academics. But at some point, we're going to have to make a choice and prioritize between our healthy financial statements and these programs and teacher pay and all the things. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, I think, over time, and determining what of these new programs we put in place with the ESSER dollars do we as a board believe should be continued, and we'll have to prioritize that with other things that we've historically spent money on.
Any other comments? You can move on now.
give me just a moment to get back to the slide. And now we're moving on to benefits. So Director Reichs will walk you through the remainder of the presentation.
Good evening, President Zaidema, members of the governing board, Superintendent Gunning, and meeting attendees. Our intention this evening is to continue the conversation regarding employee benefits as part of our district total compensation. First, I would like to review a summary of research that was completed on comparable district leave benefit plans. We reviewed leave plan policies of 5 districts. The research
first showed that Litchfield Elementary School District's vacation plan is competitive to other districts. This included a comparison of accruals, maximum accrual rules, and payout upon termination rules. We then reviewed earned leave or personal leave plans of 5 districts. This was a little bit more challenging due to inconsistent policies. No one policy was the same, so it made it challenging. Some things to point out. 2 of the 5 districts we researched had unlimited accruals. Important to note, Litchfield Elementary School District has a maximum of accrual of 100 days of earned leave. Additionally, all other districts researched do pay out the balances of earned leave once a separating employee reaches a service milestone. So that's typically around 5 years of service. And the sub rate is used for that payout in most instances. Now, the sub rate by district will vary. It's considered as well an element of retirement, this payout of earned leave. And I want to talk to that just for a minute. That payout assists with the gap of when ASRS payments to a retired employee kick in. There's about a 2-month delay from when your paycheck ends to when you receive your pension. Also want to share one of the districts, so one of the 5 offers an annual voluntary buyout of accrued sick time. So that particular district doesn't have earned leave. They instead call it sick time. So again, semantics, but they allow staff to sell up to 40 hours of up to a maximum payout of $350. So up to 40 hours. And there's a maximum payout of $350. This same district pays out unused sick time if an employee reaches 5 years of service at the time of termination, and that payout, instead of being paid at a sub rate, is a maximum hourly rate of about $15 per hour. And again, it varies depending on the service years. So at this point, I thought this is a good break for questions specifically about leave plans and the data that was researched before we go further.
Ms. Clymer.
I'm not ready right now. I know there's a chart in here that you went over it, so I just reserve a
Okay.
question for the future. I'm not ready right now.
Ms. Moran.
Yeah, I mean, my general question is, I see this data, I see the information that was provided. One of the reasons that I asked for this information was to try to determine, we have these policies in place, people accrue this time, people get paid out when they leave. My goal as a board member is to attract and retain the best teachers and the best staff members. So my question really is are our current policies working for us? Or would we be better off changing our leave policies and giving people more money in their paycheck today rather than having to accrue this leave to pay off eventually? I understand what you're saying about retirement and how there would be a gap in pay. So that would make sense that there would be a payout potentially with some leave that had been accrued over time. But I guess I'm not able to bridge the gap to get an answer to that question based on this information that was provided. So how can I do that? Or how would you recommend we maybe get an answer to that?
Would it help to have a clarification maybe that payout of leave is rewarding here at our district as well, employees who have 5 years of service or longer. So that payout doesn't occur in our policy unless a staff member or a teacher has been with us 5 years or longer. So it certainly is kind of a benefit for continuing with the district for a longer period. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I see that is the idea behind it. But I guess my question is, if we were to survey our employees to say, how important is this leave payout to you and you staying here? Would you rather have more money in your paycheck today? Or would you rather get this payout if you stay 5 years or longer? Just curious what the answer would be.
Yeah, we've not asked that question.
I guess those are the types of things that I know we have these policies in place and these policies are competitive, but when people are looking at coming to our district, are they looking at, well, yeah, how much leave am I going to be able to accumulate if I stay here for 10 years? I don't think so. I mean, I think they know that once they've been here for 10 years and someone else has left and they said, man, I got a fat check when I left. It was great. Then they know that that's there. But as a board, I think part of our responsibility is to look at these policies and make sure that they're doing what we want them to be doing with where we are today. And I can't answer that question based on this information. Yes, we look competitive with what other districts are doing, but could we be doing it better is really my main concern there.
May I?
Yes, go ahead.
Good.
Jeremy.
I just had a comment based on what Ms. Moran said. That I get what she's saying, but it sort of seems to be based on the presumption that this is costing us money, when in fact it actually may be saving us money, because what you're doing by giving this reward is you're rewarding people that don't take sick leave and people that don't so if you're paying this out at a lesser rate than what our cost would be. So for instance, if someone takes a lot of sick leave, we have to hire, a substitute teacher. Whereas the person who, really is diligent about not taking sick leave, is in a sense putting money in the bank, but maybe only half the money that it's actually costing the district if they were to take the sick leave. So I don't know how much it is, but I would say that, because I agree with you, why would we be offering this? If you go question people, they're not likely to go, oh, I want to go work for LESD because their payouts are great. What it actually is it could be an incentive for them to really control their sick leave and stuff, because it is putting money in the bank to their benefit. And I wouldn't, almost like putting away a 401k or something. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's actually the case here, if you grind the numbers out.
Yeah, which I do understand that point. However, one of the things that we've been talking about for the last 2 to 3 years is teacher burnout. And I don't think encouraging our employees to not take time off is impacting teacher burnout in the way that we want it to. When people talk about sick time, it's for being sick, and we don't want our employees to come in when they're sick, whether that's mental health or physical health or the health of a family member. So I just feel like this is if we're saying this is an incentive so that we hope people don't use their sick time, I just disagree with that fundamentally as an employer.
May I also add to just that piece that we just that you spoke about, Board Member Moran and Board Member Honek. One thing that I haven't mentioned that's important to consider with earned leave is that it also fulfills a gap if and when there's a long-term illness. So some of our staff do purchase short-term disability. Some do not. There is a gap depending on what policy you purchase of when that kicks in, and it's usually a minimum of 30 days typically. And so that too is beneficial, as I would just speak personally as an employee, to build up that bank so that I have that to lean on for salary continuance. So there is a benefit now to also build up that leave balance.
May I? Yeah, so one potential next step, and I'm not saying it'll provide the full answer, but it might shed some additional light. I don't have the numbers in front of me today, but I could at a future study session provide how much the leave payouts have cost the district on average. Because if you compare it against, for example, the cost of an additional 1% pay increase, I believe what we would find is it wouldn't even come near paying for that. And so when we talk about would they prefer these benefits versus a slightly higher paycheck, we may literally be talking about 0.25% or something very, very small, which may also help guide the discussion on if that's a viable avenue to increasing compensation.
I would like that information, please.
Yeah, and this certainly isn't a policy that I take lightly, these leave policies, and it's nothing that I would anticipate we would change this year regardless. I just think this is one of the pieces of the total compensation puzzle that we need to make sure that we're considering instead of just saying, well, this is how we've always done it, so we're going to continue doing that way.
Mr. Owens, do you have any questions?
No real questions, just I think it's reassuring to know that we do have a competitive leave policy. I do agree with what Board Member Honig said that, from a fiscal standpoint, it sounds like it makes sense. Again, you're paying somebody a sub rate when they leave as opposed to paying them earlier. I've left state service and I had 7 years of accrued leave and I got a pretty nice little paycheck at the end, and I enjoyed that. I appreciated that. It was nice. I had other people that I worked with that they were burning hours as soon as they got them. And so I think that the payout is an incentive. I think people are going to choose to use their leave time however they want it. Some people want to use it for vacations. Some people want to use it in case they get sick. Some people don't want to use it, and they shouldn't lose it. And so I like the way it looks now. I haven't got any feedback. So if teachers want to send out emails, send them my way to let me know how you feel about this. But I don't have any problems with the way it is now. I like it like how it is.
Okay, we're ready to move on.
Okay. Hey, sorry, I'll get myself together here. Okay, we are now on slide, which one are we on? Excuse me, sorry. Move on. Okay, 27. All right, we also completed a district comparison of employee insurance plans. All of the 5 districts we reviewed offer at least one medical plan that is covered 100% by the district for employee coverage. So quote unquote, a free plan to the employee. 3 of the 5 districts offered this option only on the high deductible health plan, or commonly referred to as an HDHP plan. Part of the evaluation looked at data compiled on the same 5 districts for the last plan year, and 3 of the 5 districts had a rate increase for this plan year of 2023, resulting in higher employee paycheck deductions. So meaning those districts passed some or all of that increase onto their employees. All of the districts contribute to the employee's health savings account, or HSA, for those participating in a high deductible health plan. 4 of the 5 districts contribute to the HSA without requiring the employee to also contribute. So it's not a matching situation. In general, companies or school districts contribute to an HSA account to assist the employee in meeting high deductible expenses and to encourage employees to consider a high deductible health plan option. It's important to note here that high deductible healthcare plans typically or generally run more efficiently and result in smaller premium costs for both the employer and the employee. So there's a reason why companies incentivize employees to go with a high deductible plan. And it allows room for both the employer and the employee, in most cases, to put funds toward an HSA account. Lastly, 4 of the 5 districts offer a dental plan to full-time employees, and that is covered 100% by the district for the employee coverage. So again, a free quote unquote dental plan. Next, I'd like to give an update on our medical plan renewal. District administration met again with ASBATE this month. Our medical loss ratio or loss run is currently at 93.16%. For comparison, a good loss ratio is around 75% to be eligible for what's considered a rate pass, meaning no increase, or a decrease. Our district's loss ratio is high due to an increase in large chronic medical claims and pharmacy costs, mainly specialty drugs. It's important to note here, when we met with ASBATE, they shared with us that they're rolling out a program called Prudent RX. And this is meant to help drive down future pharmacy costs and try and control that. Hopefully we'll see some benefit of that in future renewals. ASBATE will share our final plan renewal with us on March 1st. I'm anxiously awaiting it. At this point, we are anticipating an increase in the range of 5 to 10%. If you remember I think it was in November, I presented a 10% increase. In our current plan and premium structure, a 5 to 10% increase would result in an annual cost to the district in the range of $289,000 to $629,000. And again, this assumes we don't make any plan changes. This slide shows a breakdown by employee classification. So you've got certified, classified, and admin. And here you're seeing the number of employees enrolled in medical or those that chose to waive medical, meaning they are not enrolled. Just to point out, is a fairly small number of employees that are waiving that plan. Now on this slide, we're presenting scenarios, important to note here that the scenarios we presented earlier today, or that Michael or Executive Director Vaughn, presented earlier, included the assumption that the still on here, would be passed along to the employees, so that was not coming on to the district as an expense. We have seen, important to note, I talked about it earlier, that some other districts have passed along rate increases to their employees this last plan year. This slide will show you the decision, that a decision to pass along increase, what that impact would be to each employee paycheck. Again, this scenario assumes a 5% rate increase. At this point, I would call it our best case scenario based off of the information we know. In this scenario, the district would still be able to provide a medical plan that is free to the employees or 100% covered by the district for coverage. That plan is the high deductible health plan, or the HDHP plan. We can accomplish this by changing the district's contribution to the health savings account, or the HSA. And even with this change, our district is still contributing more than the HSA that is being contributed by 3 of the 5 districts. It's important to note here the tax advantages to an HSA for our employees. And we will continue, as we have in past years, to educate staff during open enrollment about the benefits of a high deductible health plan and those HSA accounts. Lastly, here, employees that decide to stay on the Banner Copay Gold plan, or that middle tier plan that's on the slide, would pay an average of $19.26 per paycheck for employee coverage. And currently that is a no charge benefit to our employees. Who be going out in and out, sorry. Employees who are looking for a free medical plan option will have the option to change their medical plan enrollment during open enrollment. So if we did make this change and go along with this assumption, employees can make a change at that time. All right. So quick little notes on dental. The district administration met with Valley Schools this week. That's where our dental plan is with. And we have good news to report. We will have a rate pass, meaning no increase to our dental plan for the 23-24 year. Just to let you know a little bit of info, as of December 2022, we have 825 employees enrolled on our employee dental plan, and we pay 100% of the cost for that employee coverage, resulting in an expense annually to the district of $325,000. At this point, I would welcome any questions or feedback on our employee benefits data or the data I presented this evening.
Ms. Clymer.
I have a question. I just want to make sure I am looking at this chart, the hand carry that you provided to us titled Other District Insurance Information Comparison. So this is actually like the dollars and cents of all the different things. So in the LASD column, the second option down, it says annual employer contribution, $7,356. So just to clarify, that is what we are currently paying at 100% of medical coverage for employees.
Yes, that's correct, Board Member Clymer. We pay that amount for each plan. So regardless of which plan the employee chooses, that is paid towards the plan.
So the question is, the cost to us as an employer is the exact same for all of these plans? That doesn't seem like, I mean, they're completely different plans, and yet all three of them cost us $7,356.
That is correct. Important to note, for the high deductible healthcare plan, part of that $7,356 that's contributed toward the plan is put into an HSA account for the employee. But it is fairly common in whether it be in school districts or in companies, that when a company decides to give a particular amount toward employee benefits, it's the same regardless of the tier or regardless of the plan. That is fairly common to do that.
Say that one more time. I just missed that last part.
Yeah.
It's common to do what?
So it's common to contribute for the employer to contribute the same amount. So in our case, the $7,356 to whatever plan the employee chooses to participate on.
Right, absolutely. And I guess that's my question, is that they don't actually cost the same.
Correct.
We're just contributing the same. Those are two
Correct.
different things. So what I'm asking is, how much do they cost us, each of the plans? Because I know like the gold plan, I think it's the classic gold plan. We've grandfathered that, and people can no longer get into that because it costs us more, or they can choose to pay the increase. So I don't think, I mean, I guess from just what I've understood in the past, that they don't all cost us $7,356. They actually cost a different amount for us. We just provide that as a service to everyone and make up the difference to everybody. So my question is, how much do they actually cost? Do you understand, Jody, what I'm saying?
Correct,
Okay.
yeah. So the made up difference, like on that specific plan, is passed to the employee. So anyone participating on that, if they choose to stay in that, they have to pay whatever the excess amount is over the $7,356.
And that's what drives the difference in cost to the employee for the different plans.
Okay, so just to clarify, our high deductible plan actually costs us $5,850 because we put the additional amount into their
HSA.
HSA. Yes.
So it costs $5,850. The middle one cost $7,356, and the larger one cost $7,356 plus $732, whatever that number is. Because $732 is what the employee is charging for the higher one.
Yes, for the employee coverage. That's
Right.
correct.
Even, I mean, it's a combination of us versus them. Okay. So when you suggest that we would reduce our contribution to $906 a year, explain that math to me. So if we're trying to maintain that 7356 number, cutting it in half so that the other $906 or whatever it is just the increase, the 5 to 10% increase that we're expecting. And we're just going to take it out of our contribution for HSA.
Yes, Board Member Clymer, that's correct. So we're reducing the HSA contribution by the district. That is assuming that HSA plan is going to cost 5% more. And so in order to continue to pay 100% of that cost and maintain the same level of contribution, we would need to reduce that HSA contribution.
Understood. Thank you.
I don't have a question. I just want to point out two things that I think are really important to keep in mind. One is that the high deductible plan is still an option, as Director Reichs mentioned, is still an option that employees can elect at zero cost. And in fact, they are paid to take this plan. One of the tax advantages is that an HSA is not a use it or lose it prospect. So a high health savings account goes hand in hand with the high deductible plan. So the $906 that the district would in theory or in reality put into your HSA is your money to keep if you leave the district. If you don't spend that on medical, that is a savings account that some people accumulate over time to supplement retirement and that sort of thing. So there are lots of really great reasons to go to a high deductible plan. I've been using one for close to 20 years and it's great. If you go to one, you're really not going to go back, I don't think. So just want to emphasize again that there is still going to be an option that would not impact your take-home pay, and it would be good coverage that you would then be able to potentially accumulate some funds to be used for medical expenses in the future.
Mr. Owens.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. We gotta, it sucks. We gotta get, if there's a 5% rate increase or 10% rate increase, it's gotta get paid for by somebody. And, we've only got so much money and we're, I think I did the math real quick on a family at 40. How many paychecks are there a year? Is it 26? They average it out 26.
So we have 26 paychecks per year. However, our deductions are paid over 21 pay periods.
21. Okay. So it's a little less. So maybe $800 for a family increase at 5%. Okay. So no questions.
Mr. Honak.
No questions. Thank you.
So this has been a tricky subject that's come up every year because there's constant increases, and that's true everywhere. No matter where you work, insurance increases are happening everywhere. And so nobody up here wants to take money out of our teachers' pockets. Of course, none of us want to do that. But like Mr. Owen said, like we've been saying over and over again, there's only one pot of money and we can only do so much with that pot of money. And I mean, right now we are paying over $7,300 per employee that has this insurance. And they need to keep that in mind when they're thinking about their total pay that they're getting. They're getting whatever their base salary is, all the other things that we add onto it, and they're getting $7,300 by having the insurance. And so I do hope that more people will talk about the options, and I do hope that we can keep doing that, like the high deductible plan, and have people go to that if they really cannot afford to pay the extra money out of pocket, which I get can be, we up here might not be in the same position as everybody, right? So there are going to be people where $20 extra out of their paycheck is a lot, and I get that, but look at your other options and find what's best for you. And hopefully we can make this work for everybody so that you're going to have your pay increase that we're hoping to give you and also not have too much of a hit with the insurance because nobody wants to pass on this total insurance. I know there's been a lot of rumors going around that we were going to suddenly make them pay for their insurance, and that is not ever what we've talked about of all of a sudden we're just going to make you pay for your insurance. So I appreciate that you put these numbers together for us and you showed us what the other districts are doing. That definitely helps us looking at what we need to do moving forward.
I think this is a tricky subject for a lot of reasons, but I think the bottom line is I can't mathematically figure out how we continue to pay 100% of benefits. Period. I mean, with or without a raise, with or without ESSER funds, with or without a fiscal cliff, like none of that stuff matters. I do not see us spending 5 to 10%. That is $300,000 to $650,000 a year, $300,000 to $650,000 a year. That's not sustainable. So it's not a matter of, do we have a heart for our employees or do we care about $20 per paycheck? I don't see any of that mattering in the end, only because we physically cannot afford it. We do not have money in the bank to pay for this. And it saddens me that that's what is the problem, but it is what it is. And I think trying to be as reasonable as we can and say there is still 100% paid option. That's important to me, that we still keep that option available so that whether you love the high deductible plan or not, there is an option that is affordable, that is 100% paid, and that is reasonably good insurance that your family can rely on. That's what's important to me. And seeing that we're still able to do that and contribute to the HSA. I know it's not as much as we have in the past, but we still have that ability to contribute, I think is the silver lining of the gray cloud, unfortunately. So I don't think, at least in my mind, I don't see a choice in doing it any other way and maintaining the budget numbers that we've seen and avoiding further cuts down the road. And I think our job is not always easy. And today it's going to get harder because we're going to have to make the choice that says we have to be fiscally conservative in this nature, because 2 years from now, what could have this year been a 5% jump could be what would feel like a 15 or 20% jump 3 or 4 years from now. And that does not seem financially responsible to me for our employees. So I think doing it in smaller increments and allowing them to make adjustments, whether it's the plan or having a spouse or children or moving people around, if you have multiple options within your family, is better to start now than 2 or 3 years from now when we're really up against the wall and have zero choices. I do think that's our responsibility to make sure we don't back ourselves into that corner today.
The other thing I would like to emphasize and make sure, just to look at the opposite side of the coin. So I think rather than saying we're not going to absorb the $300,000 to $600,000 increase, I think what is beneficial to look at is the fact that we are absorbing for all of those folks enrolled in medical. We as a district are paying out $6.9 million to cover that $7,356 a year for every employee that takes advantage of the medical. So almost $7 million is what we are contributing toward your medical. So again, you still have the option of not contributing if you go to the HGHP plan, or you're going to need to make a contribution toward that. But please don't forget that we are contributing almost $7 million to that at the same time.
Any other comments? Mr. Honak.
No, I don't have any more comments. Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have the opportunity to ask for additional information for our next?
Yes, I think that was coming up next, right? Like other things we wanted to talk about.
Okay, sorry, go ahead
That's okay.
in your order.
I didn't know if you guys had any more stuff or if you were looking for information from us now, things we may want you to bring forward. So
Yes, any feedback on future information would be helpful.
I'm going to start. I would like to get some information potentially. I know we're talking about all these cuts we have to make. So sorry, I'm going to add something. I'd like to find out what it would cost to add of what it would look like as far as costs to make our special teachers become full-time versus being part-time like they are right now.
To clarify, are you meaning the classified specials teachers?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Clymer. We can move to the next one, come back to you.
Sorry, I'm just making notes to keep track. I think as I already requested, just I just lost it. I'm sorry, Kim, you're gonna have to go. I did have a request and we already talked about it, but I'm gonna have to go back and look at my notes. I apologize. Please go ahead.
Okay, no worries. I have two. My first request is we last year implemented an increase for our student transporters. And we have still struggled to fill some of those open positions. I believe we have somewhere between 10 and 15 on a regular basis that are still open. So some of the feedback that I received from not only our transportation department, but other districts is that we do not have the opportunity for our student transporters to be full-time, meaning that they would drive a route and then come and do something else in between routes and then drive an afternoon route. And so my question is that possible for us to create some positions or change some of the open positions to be full-time positions, as well as keep our part-time positions to better accommodate folks who might want one or the other in order to fill the positions that we have open and hopefully solve that problem and that gap. So I don't know what that would cost or what that would look like.
Yeah, so it's a good idea to look at it. I do think it's important to note that in the work calendars that the board approved, I believe it was last meeting, one of the changes was to increase the hours for bus drivers from what they currently are to 32 hours a week. And the driving force behind that was twofold. One, we believe it will help in the recruiting process to actually be able to advertise and communicate that that's the hours. But two, when the team and I were looking at actual payroll data, that's what the bus drivers were averaging, which is why you're not seeing you don't see it in my scenario because we're already paying it. But I will say that in conversations with Megan and the transportation department, we are hopeful that that change alone will allow us to attract additional bus drivers.
Okay, so you're saying that the average hours that student transporters are actually getting is higher than what we hire them for, but right now for recruitment purposes, we're advertising this hour amount, even though they're actually be able to get more hours. So we want to change that recruiting and make sure folks know that they can actually get more than those minimum hours.
Yes, ma'am. So the idea is with that work calendar change was to align what the position is actually stated to be with what was actually happening so that we could advertise that for recruiting purposes, because you can imagine, even if you're being fully transparent to a candidate, it's hard you can't promise the 32 hours.
Yeah.
But you could say that, they average it, but there's just much more credence to being able to show that that's actually what the position is.
Okay, for sure. Great. And I would be open to hearing any other suggestions to solve that. Staffing.
I have one.
Go ahead, Mr. Honak.
Just maybe it's a crazy idea, but I don't think it's very crazy. We're looking for janitorial staff and bus drivers, and the bus drivers are only working in the morning, the afternoon. And a lot of the equipment that if you go into stores and stuff like that, somebody's driving around a machine that's the equivalent of mopping the floors. It's like a little thing that you're driving it around. Same thing for polishing and stuff like that. And when I went to UCLA, I had to work, be at night in the film school to get access to the equipment. And I met a couple guys that were janitors. They were working 4 different jobs. One of them owned 5 apartment buildings. You think of a janitor, but these people can make a lot of money. And so I don't think it's a crazy idea that we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone to make a really kind of high paying job for someone that drove our buses morning and night and did our janitorial. You don't need everybody. You just need probably, as we thought, maybe if we had 10 people that decided to double their pay, possibly, we could fill those positions really quickly and probably save a ton of money by not needing to contract outside anymore. I'm done.
Thank you for that. Ms. Moran, did you have anything else?
Yes, I do have one other area that I would like to get some feedback on. Last year, we added additional instructional aids to help support teachers and lessen teacher burnout. We've gotten great feedback on our school tours from the addition of those positions. We all know that adding instructional aids is significantly less expensive than adding certified positions, as well as more cost effective than reducing class sizes. So I'd like to get the administration's feedback on potentially expanding that program. Could we add additional instructional aids to assist our teachers and staff? And if so, what would that look like optimally? I know different campuses use those positions in slightly different ways. So I'd like to see what the impact of that would be. That seems to be the most cost-effective way, or a cost-effective way to get additional supports for our teachers. I know some of the feedback that we've gotten recently is about teachers having more prep time, teachers having, wanting to go to a 4-day week, or wanting to have, early releases every week. And I'm not sure that any of that is feasible at this point in time, but I would like to provide additional resources if possible, and look into the options for expanding those instructional aids positions.
Mr. Owens?
Yeah, no questions. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for asking all the questions. Those helped me as well. So thank you. So I'm good. Thanks.
Mr. Honak, did you have any requests for them to bring back to us at a future meeting for the budget?
The only request that I had was the one that I think I made earlier, just to make it clear, is that I'm kind of interested in is the number of parents submitting requests for special education, testing for their kids. Is that the cause of the increase in the number of students in special education?
Okay, is that something we could just have in a Friday update? Okay, Superintendent Gunning is shaking her head yes. So we can expect to get that information in a Friday update. Does anybody have anything else? Does the district need anything else from us?
Okay, can I go back to my?
Go back, yes,
found-
yes, that's
I'm
right.
just
Ms. Clymer
reiterating.
remembers.
This is not new, so I already asked this question, so I don't get points against me for requesting something new. I'm not. Director Vaughn, we talked about the breakdown of state and federal funding for special ed in comparison to our student population, just to get a better feel of what that looks like, was the first one. And then the second was, and this may morph and change, so I'm not sure after you've done all these calculations, this might not look the same, but compare the 2% recommended increase to last year's raise amount with the new base comparison, I guess is the right word, just so that 2% this year is equal to 4% last year, whatever. I don't think it's going to be that cut and dry, but.
Do you mind if I go back to a previous slide? Because I actually think I can show that now.
Let's do it.
All right. Now, this is just one example employee, but why did I put all these slides in here? Man.
Is it slide 8 you're looking for, I think?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get there. Here we go. Oh, one too many. Nope. I'm so close. There we go. So in 2023, well, let me preface this by saying I think there would be some benefit to going further back. But for what we have tonight, FY 23 shows what their base salary was. And so in historical Litchfield nomenclature, what that really was is FY 22's base pay plus their increase. And then you can see what their increase was in FY 23. And then all the other compensation. And you can see the same in FY 24. So it's not entirely fair to just compare the 1889.83 to the 978.92 because of the $200 increase in the classroom site fund areas. But that gives you a little bit of an idea. I'll for sure provide more additional information. I just wanted to bring attention to what we do have tonight.
And what was that percentage from 2022 to 2023?
I wish I had that written down.
In Michael's world.
In my slight defense, I wasn't here, so I'm sorry.
Me neither.
So just so that I understand, the 1889 is, I believe last year it was a 4% increase. Does that sound right?
I think it was
4% increase?
4%, yeah.
Yeah, 4% increase. So 1889 is 4% of 46,991 is what you're saying. And you're saying 978 is 2% of 48 plus 2,600 plus 4,400 plus 350 plus 2,915.
No, ma'am.
Right.
Also in the 24 numbers is a $200 increase to classroom site fund. Sadly, the numbers come out this way, so it makes it a little confusing. The reason that is, though, is one of the classroom site fund buckets, the $100 ends up being a 4% increase. And so when you have part of the compensation increasing by 4% to get the total up to the 2%, it's less. Which is why I showed the total base compensation and demonstrated that it was a 2% increase. Because when you are looking at all of the different components, it can get confusing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should wait and have Michael give more history as well, because I think just looking at what we have right here, it can be misleading as to anomaly years. And so I think it would be
Well,
better.
yeah, I agree with that, but I guess I'm confused. If we're saying that in FY 23, the increase was on the base salary, and in FY 24, the increase is going to be on the base salary plus classroom site fund, plus instructional improvement, plus M&O override. That's what we're saying, right? The base pay is now going to be all four of those things. That looking at this chart doesn't show me that, because I don't think 978 is 2% of all five of those numbers added up.
No, the 1,178.92 is, which includes the 978.92 and $200 increase in classroom site fund.
So really the comparison you're saying is the 1889 to 1178. That's a better comparison.
Yes.
Okay, that I understand. Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody else?
Board Member Clymer, for one clarification, and your last, when we were originally on this, you talked about not including the override into the base. Do you want, just to clarify, do you want that not in the base, or do you want that in the base? In the number when he brings back the calculation?
I don't know. I mean, that's not only my decision. I think to me, I have a hesitation on that. I don't know how other board members feel about it, but
It's not in here in this one. The 2% is just the base and then the $200. There's no
Correct.
2% on the instructional improvement or the M&O override.
Well, but how the increased number was calculated was to get it to 2% on the total. Where it gets interesting to think about or contemplate is going back to the consultant's recommendation. The reason he's suggesting we roll it all up is most districts do. And so to stay competitive, his recommendation was to do the same. And so if we were to take it out, I believe the consultant's recommendation, Leanne and I had a phone call with him to clarify this actually, that his recommendation would just be a higher percentage to get you to the same point. We certainly can decide to give less of an increase than the compensation study recommends. But if we were to call the consultant back, he would recommend the same dollar amount raise, if that makes sense.
Well, how do other board members, I mean, I don't want to open a giant can of worms because I think we're about to be finished, but how do other people feel about this? I mean, I think I could probably go either way. It's just all the rest of them seem to make sense. It's for some reason, it's just the M&O that gives me pause. So I just want to have that conversation before we give that specific feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's been ingrained in us since we passed that additional 5% override, that would be separate and it would always go toward teachers and it would need to be separated because that additional 5% could go away at some point. But I agree with what Executive Director Vaughn said, which is to say that the dollar amount is going to be the same, whether it's in there or not. That's really the recommendation, is to stay competitive and attract and retain the best teachers. We need to give a 2% increase on our base compensation. And whether you want to put M&O override on a separate line, and then the number's really going to be the same, it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other. So I think for simplification, I would still like to see the M&O override separated on the paycheck, because that always keeps that top of mind for our employees of that commitment that we've made as a board. But then, yeah, I'm fine with putting it together.
One option that potentially is a middle ground is what I have presented here is that the M&O override compensation amount staying the same, and that we're giving the increase that will then roll into the historical base number into the next year. We could separate out the 2% increase that is the part that is the M&O override compensation, and increase that line so that as opposed to 2915, that part of the 2% raise, that dollar amount would increase to 2973.30. So it's still entirely separate, but we're still following the recommendation. Does that make?
Yeah, I
sense?
understand. I understand what you're saying. President Zeidema, what are your thoughts?
I think whatever we do, we need to have a very simple sheet that we give to our staff that explains this to them, because this is a lot of jumping around in numbers and working to make it 2%. And at the end of the day, they just want to know what they're making and how much more money they're making. So we need to make it very easy for them to know what that is. So I can go however, that doesn't really matter to me, so long as we're getting them the increase. I don't care how you want to figure that out, but I do want to make sure, again, that it's very understandable to our staff when this does get to them.
I think if you have the intention of giving them the 2% on the override, whether you put it in the base pay or not, just put it in there. My thought was, when you keep it separate, it is separate, right? You don't get the 2% on that, you get the 2% on everything else. But if you're saying we're going to calculate it anyway, don't separate it. That seems more complicated for no reason. Mr. Owens, you that same. Okay, so the answer looks like no.
Mr. Honak, did you have any feedback on that conversation?
Yes, I do. I agree with you, President Zeidema, 500% that we need to make it simpler, and that we need to go. That's what everybody has recommended as long as I've been on the board. Various people have recommended the same thing, and that if we need to make it in an understandable manner, but we need some disclaimers in the contract that they need to be aware of, that, you know, if this happens and this happens and this happens, different things change. Most people will be, that's acceptable to most people, because it's everywhere in every contract that anybody signs. So I really think that's the problem is that, I mean, we really do need to make it simple so they know what they're getting paid, what the increase is.
Okay, I think that's everything from all of us. So if there's nothing else, then I think we're done.
I move to adjourn the study session.
I will second.
Actually, before we adjourn, I just want to make one clarification. On the special ed thing, I'm not putting a value on it. What I'm looking for more than the parents is I just think that it's a significant thing. It's happening in the entire state, that we should be looking into what is the reason that it's increasing. Because if it's something that we're doing wrong as a school district that we need to improve, that's what I'm looking for. So that was what my request is that it's something worth looking into. It's admittedly something that we've heard people admit we don't really know. That's all I wanted to say. So I'll second the motion to adjourn.
Okay, having a first and a second, I'm going to do a roll call vote. Ms. Clymer, how do you vote?
Yay.
Ms. Moran?
Yay.
Mr. Owens?
Yay.
Mr. Honak?
Yay.
I am a yay.